Please be seated. To all those who might be celebrating it, happy St. Patrick's Day. I see some wearing the green indeed. I don't have the green on, but they tell me that this is indeed a symbol of Ireland somehow or other. So salmon was also Irish, so they tell me. All right, okay. I'd like to begin, if I may, with St. Paul's prayer for the people of Ephesus. It's my prayer for you as well. It is why I come and do these things, in the hope that you too will grow and that Christ will become more and more truly living in your hearts through faith. So in that spirit then, let's pray. Out of God's infinite glory, may God give you the power through God's own Spirit for your hidden self, for all the best that is in you, to continue growing strong, so that Christ might live in your hearts through faith. Then, planted in love and built on love, you will, with all the saints, have strength to grasp the height and the depth, the length and the breadth, until, coming to know the love of Christ, which is beyond all knowledge, you too will be filled with the utter fullness of God. Glory be to God, whose power working in us can do infinitely more than we can ask or imagine. Glory be to God, from generation to generation, in the Church and in Christ Jesus, forever and ever. Amen. I'd like just to recall the theme of our parish mission, and it is this: God depends on us to be miracles. People who reveal something of God's own love, God's own care, God's own compassion, God's own forgiveness, God's own welcome. But the fact of the matter is, we cannot do that without God's help. And God does indeed give us help to be miracles, because God gives us help to allow us to come to know Jesus more intimately. And as we come to know Jesus more intimately, hopefully we will come to love him, or as I prefer to say, like him. Because if we come to like him, then we might want to live and love and trust like he did. So it's in that spirit then that we continue. Yesterday we spoke of God giving us the gift of love. A love that once we have received it, we almost cannot keep it to ourselves. A love that makes us reach out to let others know that they are loved too. Let me give you just two little examples. They're kind of funny, but one is funny, one is serious. Of how a waiter in a restaurant could actually reveal something of the heart of God. There was a mother and a father, grandmother and grandfather, and a little girl who went out to dinner. And as you can imagine, when they all were seated, our conversation became very adult. The mother and the father and the grandmother and the grandfather were all talking to one another. And poor Molly, the 6-year-old, was left off to the side, feeling very out of it and alone, and nobody paying any attention to her, feeling as if she were nobody. Finally, the waiter came and began taking the orders. And he finally came to Molly, and he said, "What would you like?" "I'd like a hot dog and a tall Coke," she said. "No, no, no," said her grandmother. "She will have the baked chicken. And," said her father, "the mashed potatoes. And," said her mother, "a glass of milk." So much for poor Molly and what she might have wanted. And as the waiter turned to go, he said to her, "Would you like ketchup or mustard on your hot dog?" Somebody, and Molly turned and said, "He thinks I'm important. He thinks I'm important." And so you see, it's no big deal. Plain ordinary things that we can do reveal something of God's heart, something of God's care. "Oh no, you are my special girl. I pay attention to you." But there's also another, it's a little bit more serious story. And it's the story told by a husband about his wife. And this is how it goes. remember a time when I was sitting on the antique window seat that my wife Helen has treasured through the years. Because the original fabric had worn through, Helen had recently recovered it in a handsome corduroy fabric. A heavy storm was in progress, and I sat staring at the rain pelting down on dead autumn leaves. The gloomy look of the garden seemed to match the mood of hopelessness that had come over me. Problems at work had made me fearful of the future. Basic questions that surface with the coming of middle age or even old age had made me fearful of life itself. I started to light my pipe and accidentally spilled some hot ash, which burned a hole right in the center of the newly covered window seat. Seeing what had happened, Helen calmly threaded a needle and stitched a beautiful flower over the charred spot. When I looked at the finished work, I realized that it was a striking symbol of our long life together, and my spirits began to soar. I had married a repairer of broken spirits, a healer of wounds, a woman whose very presence was an antidote to fear. Moreover, I understood, perhaps for the very first time, that it was Helen's deep and abiding trust in God's goodness that made it possible for her to be a source of light and a harbinger of hope in times of darkness and despair. Simple, everyday things that happen. You know, she could have said, "I told you to stop smoking 5 years ago." But she didn't. No, she understood the pain and fear and the worry in her husband's heart. And she did what she could to alleviate that fear, to take that away. Plain ordinary simple stuff. But doesn't it sound like what Jesus was doing? Very much so. Excuse me. One last little story, and will be a lead into where we're going this evening, because God gives us the gift of light, but again, the gift of love. You know, there was a little guy, maybe 5 years old, who was left with his father. His mother went off to, I don't know, an Avon party or whatever you call those things, now the father was simply not used to having to deal with his 5-year-old by himself. "Mom, you take care of him." So after about 5 minutes, he had it with the little guy, right up to here. So he says, "Okay, I've had it with you. Into your room, close the door, lights out." And so the kid slunk off into his room, closed the door, the lights went out. And 5 minutes later, "Dad." "What?" "I'm thirsty. Will you bring me a drink of water?" "No, I told you, lights out. You had your chance. That's it." 5 minutes later. "Dad." "What?" "Will you bring me a drink of water? I'm thirsty." "No, I told you, you had your last chance. If you ask one more time, I'm going to have to come in and spank you." 5 minutes later. "Dad." "What?" "When you come in to spank me, would you bring me a drink of water?" And I tell that story, my sisters and brothers, because that little guy had come to know, to trust in his heart of hearts, that even though he had been a bad guy, his father loved him so much that his father would come through for him in his need. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could come to have that same kind of trust and love in God? Trusting that God is going to come through for us, even if we have messed things up. Wouldn't that be wonderful? If we could have that kind of faith, that kind of trust in God's love for us. Because God does indeed love us and come through for us, no matter where we have been, no matter what's going on. Despite the assumptions, despite the irony, despite the sarcasm, despite the defenses up against God's love, no, God hangs in there with us. Isn't that great? The gift of love. Helping us to come to know the heart of Jesus so that we can have hearts like he had, revealing the heart of God. All right. The truth, if we acknowledge it, is not only do we need God's love to be miracles, to be ambassadors for Christ, but we also need the gift of God's light so that we can see others and ourselves as God does. Because, believe it or not, we do see others not as God sees them. And so we can sometimes be pretty awful to other people. We sometimes are not miracles revealing God's love. And so, again, another little story is about a duck hunter. Coming down 14, I see Duck Hunters Association up there. So maybe it's close to them. All right. And here's the story. There was a little boy visiting his grandparents on their farm. And he was given a slingshot to play with in the woods. He practiced in the woods, but he could never hit the target. Getting a little discouraged, he headed back for dinner. And as he was walking back, he saw Grandma's pet duck. Out of impulse, he let the slingshot fly, hit the duck square in the head, and killed it. He was shocked and scared to death. In a panic, he hid the dead duck in the woodpile, only to see his sister watching. Sally had seen it all, but she said nothing. After lunch the next day, Grandma said, "Sally, let's wash the dishes." But Sally said, "Grandma, Johnny told me he wanted to help in the kitchen." And she whispered to him, "Remember the dog." So Johnny did the dishes. And later that day, Grandma asked if the children wanted to go fishing. And Grandma said, "I'm sorry, but I need Sally to help make supper." Sally just smiled and said, "Well, that's all right, because Johnny told me he wanted to help." And she whispered again, "Remember the dog." So Sally went fishing and Johnny stayed to help. And after several days of Johnny doing both his chores and Sally's, he finally couldn't stand it any longer. He came to Grandma and confessed that he had killed the duck. And Grandma knelt down, gave him a hug, and said, "Sweetheart, I know. You see, I was standing at the window, and I saw the whole thing. But because I love you, I forgave you. I was just wondering how long you would let Sally make a slave of you." Oh, that sweet little big sister, right? Again, we sometimes see others not in the heart of God. Or, a couple of short little stories, sometimes how do we see others? One man is talking to another. "My wife and I," he exclaims, "got angry last night and we had a fight." And his friend asked him, "How did it end up?" "How did it end up? Why, she came crawling to me on her hands and knees." "What did she say?" "She said, 'Come out from under that bed, you coward.'" How we see others. But also sometimes, my sisters and brothers, how do we see ourselves? How we can see ourselves and put ourselves down. One man talking to another. "My greatest fear is that I will be standing behind Mother Teresa in the final judgment line, and I'll hear God tell her, 'You know, Mother Teresa, you should have done more.'" See how we see ourselves as unworthy, not having done enough, all that kind of stuff. And so it is that we depend upon God to give us light to see ourselves and to see others as God does. And so we do need God's gift of light. And so I invite you this evening to listen to another love letter. Remember the love letters, transforming people because the power of love came into their lives? And it is a letter that describes what happened when Jesus, the light of the world, came into the life of a boy who desperately wanted to see. Physically, he desperately wanted to see. But he also wanted to see himself differently and to be seen by others differently. It is a story of God's love and of God's dream, not only for that little guy, but for all of us also. It's a story that helps us know the heart of Jesus and what Jesus was up to. And knowing Jesus and what he was up to helps us to know what it is to be real miracles revealed in the heart of God. It's not just his story, but it's our story as well. And we heard it on Sunday, like it was the gospel about the young man. And I maintain he was a kid, maybe 12 or 13 years old, because, as his mother and father said, he's old enough, let him speak for himself. And I suspect he was 12 or 13, but he couldn't make his bar mitzvah because he was blind and therefore a sinner. Okay. So I just invite you to listen to what happens to the kid. Watch how he grows, how confidence deepens within him. Because a kid born blind was bound to be a beggar for the rest of his life. You're a nothing, you're a nobody, you're a sinner, and that's all you're going to be, a beggar, period. So get used to it. That's what society and the religious culture was doing to him. So listen now to what happens. Listen how the kid grows. Listen how he gets some self-confidence. Look at how he can see who Jesus is, who he himself is, who some of those religious leaders were. As Jesus went along, he saw a young man who had been blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned?" You hear it? Who sinned? This young man or his parents, for him to have been born blind? And that's when I maintain Jesus would. When are you guys going to get it through your thick skull? Neither he nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that the works of God might be displayed in him. And then Jesus says very clearly, I am the light of the world. I have come into the world so that people can see. They can see differently. They can see God differently. They can see themselves differently. They can see others differently. And having said this, Jesus spat on the ground, made a paste with the spittle, and put this over the eyes of the blind young man and said to him, "Go and wash in the pool of Siloam." So the young man went off and washed himself and came away with his sight restored. Wow. Wow. Can you imagine what was going on in the heart of that kid? Wow. Look at this. I can see. I can see clouds, I can see people, I can see smiles, I can see flowers, I can see birds flying. Wow, I never knew any of that was there. Wow. His neighbors and people who earlier had seen him begging said, "Isn't this the young man who used to sit and beg?" And some said, "Yes, it is the same one." Others said, "No, he only looks like him." And the young man himself said, "I am the man." So they said to him, tell us how your eyes come to be open. And he said, "The man called Jesus made a paste, daubed my eyes with it, and said to me, 'Go and wash at Siloam.' So I went, and when I washed, I could see." And they asked, "Where is he?" "I don't know." Then they brought the young man who had been blind to the Pharisees. It had been a Sabbath day when Jesus made the paste and opened the young man's eyes. So when the Pharisees asked him how he had come to see, he said, Jesus put a paste on my eyes, and I watch, and I can see. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Then some of the Pharisees said, "This man cannot be from God. He does not keep the Sabbath." Others said, "How could a sinner produce signs like this?" And there was disagreement among them. So I spoke to the young man again and said, "What have you to say about him yourself, now that he has opened your eyes?" "He is a prophet," he said. However, they would not believe that the young man had been born blind and had gained his sight without first sending for his parents and asking them, "Is this young man really your son, who you say was born blind? And if so, how is it that he is now able to see?" And his parents answered, "We know he is our son." Parenthesis, and it breaks our heart that he's blind, that he's condemned to being a beggar, that he's looked upon as a sinner. It breaks our heart. They didn't say it out loud, but that's what they were feeling. We know he is our son, and we know he was born blind. But we don't know how it is that he can see now, or who opened his eyes. He's old enough. Let him speak for himself. And his parents spoke like this out of fear, because the Jews had already agreed to expel from the synagogue anyone who should acknowledge Jesus as the Christ. And this is why his parents said, "He's old enough, ask him." And stop for a moment. You know, to be thrown out of the synagogue in a small town like that was to be thrown out of society. It was to become an exile. You were ostracized. You would lose your job. People looked on you as nothing. So it was a real fear. What's going to happen here if we admit that Jesus did this? A real fear. So the Jews again sent for the young man and said to him, "Give glory to God. For our part, we know that this man Jesus is a sinner." And the young man answered, "I don't know if he is a sinner. I only know that I was blind, and now I can see." And they said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" And the young man said, "I've told you once, and you wouldn't listen. Why do you want to hear it all over again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" At this they hurled abuse at him. "You can be his disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this man, we don't know where he comes from." Listen to the young man now. The guy who was a dumb, blind beggar, condemned to life as an exile. Listen to what has happened to him. Now here is an astonishing thing. He has opened my eyes, and you don't know where he comes from? We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but God does listen to those who are devout and do his will. Ever since the world began, it is unheard of for anyone to open the eyes of someone who is born blind. If this man were not from God, he couldn't do a thing. "Are you trying to teach us?" they replied. "And you, here, a sinner through and through, since you were born?" And they drove him away. Jesus heard they had driven him away, and when he found him, he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And with perfect honesty, the young man said, "Sir, tell me who he is, that I may believe in him." And Jesus said, "You are looking at him. He is speaking to you." How was the young man able to look at Jesus? How was the young man able to come to believe? Because Jesus had opened his eyes. See, it all starts with God. It all starts with Jesus. How do you believe? Who is he, that I might believe? You're looking at him. Oh, my sisters and brothers, it's just another way of saying, we can't do this by ourselves. Isn't it wonderful, though? God gives us light to see. God opens our eyes and opens our hearts. Isn't that wonderful? And interestingly enough, did you ever wonder why Jesus had to go looking for the young man? You know, I think, as well as I, that when someone is blind and they have their begging spot, you know, maybe they have their white cane, maybe they don't, but they know exactly from the house to their begging spot. And that's all that they do, back and forth, back and forth. Now, he could see. So where do you think he was? He was out exploring. He was, oh, look at this building, look at the colors, look at how high it is. Wow, look at people, look at her beautiful hair. Look at the wonderful green sweater that she's wearing. Look at the birds in the air, the flowers growing. Wow. He was out exploring, seeing things he had never seen before. Giving thanks. Wow. Wow. And that's why, interestingly enough, Jesus went looking for him. God comes looking for us, where we are. Isn't that terrific? Such a God we have. Isn't that great? So again, just a little invitation to, yes, you know the story well. You've heard it over and over again. But if we stop and let it become real, what a difference it makes. Notice what happened with this young man. Again, with the disciples. You hear they had that same mentality. Who sinned? Who sinned? Him or his parents? You see how we get ingrained? Some of the stuff that happens to us, and we just kind of take it for granted. No, stop thinking that way. Stop thinking that way. And then the young man himself, again, he desperately not only wanted to see physically, but he wanted to see himself. Am I going to be condemned forever to being a beggar for the rest of my life? And he who had brains, he who was able to see and tell the difference between what was right and wrong, between idiocy and insight. I mean, did you want to notice how Jesus, first of all, who was Jesus for him? That man made a pace. And then, well, what do you say about him? He's a prophet. And then finally, he is from God and is the Son of God. With God's light, we are able to see. We are able to see to the heart of God. And he grows. I love it as you listen. It's like a one-act play. It really is. As the kid grows, you know, he gets confidence. He's able to stand up and talk to those adult people and say, hey, wait a minute, can't you put two and two together? What's the matter with you? You know, it's like a kid challenging a teacher. You know, you want to reach out and smack them, but, you know, hey, wait a minute. You see what is happening to that kid? The confidence that he was now getting. The ability to stand on his own 2 feet and challenge what he saw as idiocy. And it was idiocy. You know, that whole bit, this man can't be from God. He doesn't keep the Sabbath. Working on the Sabbath. Making a paste on the Sabbath. Oh, cannot be. But the fact of the matter is, those Pharisees knew full well that God himself was working on the Sabbath. Because people were born on the Sabbath. And God gave life. And people died on the Sabbath. And God welcomed them back into heaven. So you see, the young man was challenging, come on, would you guys think right? That I should be healed on the Sabbath is a sign of God at work. Rejoice. And you know, imagine the mother and the father. Yes, he is our son, and yes, he can see. Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it wonderful? And there's another little part to this. Can you imagine, you who are mothers, you know, the baby was born, and as the mother is bathing the newborn baby, how beautiful, how clean, how wonderful, new life. And then gradually, they came to see. He's blind. He can't see. And what they had been taught came back to her. what have I done? What have I done that my child should be born blind? And she was carrying that awful weight. And now that her son could see, wow, the weight was lifted. And she began to wonder, maybe some of those things are not exactly the truth. But now she could stand tall and rejoice because the power of God's love had come into not only her son's life, but into her life as well, and had opened her eyes to see the power of God at work. And the Pharisees, interestingly enough, they thought they had it all together. They thought they knew everything. But in fact, they were blind. They couldn't see. And that's what Jesus challenged them to accept and to understand. Hey, if you said you were blind, it'd be okay. But you think you see, and you don't. Sorry about that, folks. And once again, you see, here was Jesus in their midst, revealing the heart of God, and they were resisting. No, I gotta hold on to. How sad. God's way of seeing. What happens when we see with God's gift of light? When we see with the eyes of God's heart? I used to work for a living, and I was working for a boss. And when you're working for a boss, every one of them becomes an idiot, right? Until you become the boss. All right. But this boss of mine was an idiot, so I was going to leave the company. But a good friend of mine, no, come and work for me. Come and work in my division. And it was to move into what today would be called, our negotiating with unions and arbitration and all that kind of stuff. But before I could make that move, I had to see the executive vice president in the corner office. So when I go this particular day, and he didn't even say close the door or sit down, he began. Now, Eddie, you have developed a reputation for being a really nice guy, and you got to cut that out, because the people you're going to be dealing with are out to get your rear end and ours. So you got to stop being a nice guy. Now I'm thinking to myself, this is going to be a big leap upward on the corporate ladder for me. It's going to be a big increase in the amount of money that I'm making. I can get the next model of a Jaguar and drive around in it, So what am I going to do here? What shall I say? Oh, yes, Jack, you're right. But I paused for a moment and I said, Jack, excuse me. The people that I am going to be dealing with are human beings just like you and I are. And until and unless they let me know that they're out to get my rear end or yours, I'm going to deal with them as one human being deals with another, with respect. Well, but again, how do we see one another? Enemies out to get our rear end? Or can we start out by saying, no, wait a minute, this is another human being with a job to get done, and let's see if we can work together on this. If we can see others differently. Or, again, as I mentioned to you, I have been a teacher, and I was teaching Latin to a group of about 18 juniors in high school. And I had the chairs in a semicircle like this. And, of course, every word that fell from my lips, every translation that I gave, was something that they should have been copying down at once. But I was noticing this one kid who was doing really awful in Latin. He was at his desk, and he was always with a pencil in hand. But he was not taking notes about what I was saying. He was drawing. And one day, in desperation or in aggravation, I picked the book up from the desk and looked at it. And I just perfect silence. Because he was drawing all of this, science fiction stuff, Dungeons and Dragons and, this, that, and the other. But it was excellently done. Excellently done. So I said nothing but put it back down. I said, okay, how am I going to get this kid set free to let the best within him grow? So one day, we were teaching the Aeneid, a story about the Trojan horse particular section, the Trojan horse is there. Shall they bring it into the city or not? And one of the prophets, Watkins, says, no, don't do it. You can't trust those Greeks no matter what. No, don't do it. And I was like, no, we got to bring it in. Well, from out of the water comes this two-headed dragon up onto the shore, and the two-headed dragon encircles the Watkins and his twin boys and crushes them to death. Now, this kid, who couldn't understand Latin at all, but he could draw, I said, Greg, get up to the blackboard. And they had all sorts of colored chalk there. Get up to the blackboard and you draw what these guys are translating. And he did. And it was absolutely marvelous. What talent, what gift he had to be able to draw. And when it was all finished, a couple of the kids, and they should not have had their cell phones in the classroom with them. Father, I know I shouldn't have, but please, can I take a picture of this? He was a kid who saw himself as a little, no good for nothing, bad Latin student, but an artist. How do we go about setting others free to let the best that's in them grow strong? Somehow or other we got to look and see beyond the exterior. Somehow or other we need the light that God has first given to us to see ourselves. Yeah, sometimes we mess things up, but we're loved. Sometimes people condemn us to do this, but you know what? God has a dream for us. If we can help others to let that dream come true. Again, how do we see? This is written by Sister of St. Joseph, and she tells us a memory that she has, again, of someone seeing her. One of my precious memories as a little girl is visiting my grandmother. My favorite moments were sitting on her lap with my head against her. There I curled up, peaceful and content in her embrace. My grandmother would touch my face and say to me over and over again, "You are so beautiful, you are so beautiful." I remember the touch of her hand and the sweetness of her voice in these tender moments. And then, one day, I realized that my grandmother was blind, and that she could not see me, and that she never had seen me. As she touched my face and said her precious words, I said to her, "But you can't see me, Mom. You can't see me." And then she said something I have never forgotten. She softly whispered, "Oh, yes I can. I can see you with my heart." At that very moment, I knew there was another way of seeing. I whispered back, "I want to see like you, Mom. I want to see with my heart." And today I continue to whisper my little prayer. Mom, please let me see like you. Please let me see with my heart. And isn't that how God sees us? Isn't that how God sees us? And if you want to know what the heart of God is like, let me tell you one final story for the evening. I am the oldest of 7 children. There are only 4 of us left, but my one sister has 7 children. And the last of the 7 children were twins. And they were born through the normal birth canal, not by C-section. And those were the days, a while ago, when they were first letting photographers into the nurseries to take pictures of the newborn babies. So at about 2.5 hours old, the photographer took pictures of these 2 boys, born through the normal birth canal. Have you ever seen what they look like? So, my sister's out of the hospital, the babies are out of the hospital, and we're at my mother's house sitting at the kitchen table, and we were both still smoking in those days. So with the coffee and the cigarettes, and as mothers do, they take the pictures of these newborn babies, 2.5 hours old, out of her purse, and puts them on the table and says to me, "Edward, aren't they so beautiful?" And I said, "Oh yeah, Mark, of course, of course." But I'm thinking to myself, what ugly And afterwards I thought to myself, why is it that we were both looking at exactly the same things? And I thought to myself, what ugly, homely beasts. And my sister said, how beautiful. And I realized the reason why was because I was looking with just these eyes, and my sister was looking with the eyes of a mother's heart. And that, my sisters and brothers, is what the heart of God is like. God looks at each and every one of us and says, aren't they so beautiful? If only we could see ourselves and one another with the eyes of God's heart, with the eyes of a mother's heart. All right. There are, in the little handout for today, for this evening, some questions for reflection. And they're simple enough. But the first one, do I need to see myself differently? Do I need to see myself differently? Remember yesterday I mentioned, at one point I saw myself on the floor face down. Salmon, you are without doubt one of the most arrogant, egotistical, pride-filled, self-serving SOBs on the face of the earth. And sometimes I think I still am. But again, do we need to see ourselves differently? Do we need to see, there's all that stuff, but can we see ourselves as God does? Can we see ourselves as miracles? Can we, and I just invite you to appreciate this. It's another little story. I was working with a young man and a young woman getting ready for their wedding. And we had a lovely dinner and a glass of wine or two with the dinner. And I was looking for material for the homily. So at the end of the dinner, I looked at this young man, Kevin, with red hair and freckles all over his face. Irish as could be, I guess. And I said, "Kevin, what are you marrying her for?" And he looked at me and he said, "Father, what's the matter with you? Can't you see how beautiful she is? I would do anything for her. I would give my life for her." Do we hear when we gather for Eucharist, "This is my body, given for you. This is my blood, poured out for you. Not only would I, but I did give my life for you, to let you know how much I love you, to let you know how beautiful you are, to let you know I not only would, but I have given my life for you, out of love." Do I need to see myself differently? And then secondly, is there a miracle, someone sent by God who is trying to bring light into my life? Is there an area of darkness, of uncertainty, of fear, a burden that you might be carrying? Is there a miracle sent by God who is trying to bring light into my life? Or thirdly, is there someone in my life I need to see differently? Just a little example or one or two. The older we get, we take a look at children and grandchildren and we begin to wonder, oh, look at that, they're not going to Mass anymore. Oh, look at that, they're getting married outside the church. Oh, look at that, they aren't even married and they're living together. Oh, the children are not baptized. All that stuff that can go on. We look and we say, do we need to see them differently? Do we need to see them as people who are in need of love, and support and encouragement, as opposed to, why don't you go to church on Sunday? You know, you do that and you know what's going to happen. They'll make sure they don't go. Or, you know, again, it's a sad kind of a thing. Again, because there are so many people in the family. I have a niece who got pregnant and was not married. And, you know, a number of her cousins were married and were having babies, and they were bringing the babies to be baptized. And they kept saying, hey, Tracy, why don't you have Michaela baptized? So finally, with encouragement from him, she went to the local pastor, asking if she could have the baby baptized. And the answer was, I'm not going to baptize that baby. You don't belong to this church. Besides, you're not even married. How could I possibly baptize that baby? You wouldn't bring the baby up as a Catholic. Well, you know, guess what? Guess what? And as my niece said to me afterwards, she said, Uncle Edward, you know, what I could have said to him was, I could have had an abortion, you know, but I didn't. Wow. Is there someone in my life I need to see differently? Yeah. Or finally, what light can I bring into that person's life? How can I be a miracle for that person? My sisters and brothers, we are miracles. Here is a sign for you. You will find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. There's more to God than meets the eye. There's more to us than meets the eye. We can indeed reveal something of God's love in and through our own love, as Jesus did. Jesus didn't just talk about Abba, God, his Father, but Jesus reached out and touched and healed and welcomed and forgave as the heart of God did. We are called to be miracles. And so I invite you to pray once again, dear God, help me to believe the truth about myself, no matter how beautiful it is. Dear God, help me to believe the truth about myself, no matter how beautiful it is. All right. Did better tonight than last night. It's almost not even 5 of 8 yet. Okay. I would just like perhaps to close with the prayer that's on the inside cover, and then we will have closing prayer, closing hymn. Okay? Take just a few moments to reflect perhaps on some of those questions, and if anybody wants to add anything or subtract from anything I have said or attack, feel free. Someone mentioned last night, I should stop talking and let you reflect, but someone mentioned last night that, you know, at this particular moment you may not think of anything, but afterwards as you walk out, oh, you know, this dawned on me. So again, take just a moment or two, and then we'll have that closing prayer. If you do have anything you might want to say, please feel free. All right, perhaps we can pray together then that prayer that is on the inside cover of this evening's handout. All right. Replace, Lord God, my eyes with yours, so that I can see beyond underneath the tiny world I have made for myself. Show me your face rather than just a mirror of my again, refreshments are being offered. I don't think there's any green beer, but please feel free to